Okay.
Well,
not right now.
okay, so we are now recording, and closed captioning is on. So you need to choose closed captioning on your screen. It is.
So don't say anything inappropriate.
So can everybody please mute at this point in time? Thank you very much. Sanctuary of the Soul. To those of you who are visitors here for the first time, thank you again for being with us. If you are lonely, here you will find warm companionship. Here in this sanctuary of hope, you can find a new seat at the table of life and feast yourself on love and fellowship, and you will not hunger for the touch of a human hand after COVID, or an embrace of your searching spirit. If you're afraid or if you've been abused, if you ache with fatigue, here you will find rest. You will be comforted, your spiritual wounds will be dressed, and your courage will return to you. You'll be led beside the still waters, and your soul will be restored. If you seek to understand, here you will be encouraged in your search. Wonderful pathways will be lit unto you. And wherever your journeys take you, you will know that you can always come home again to this place made sacred by our love for you. This is a sanctuary of the soul. There are no boundaries in this cathedral of hope. The collective wisdom of all humankind and our painful but glorious history are open to you here. Your heart and your mind need never struggle with one another in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We have no fear of science. We have no fear of knowledge here. If someday you decide to join us, you may feel what I have felt in the words of Dorothy Lee Sayers. Quote, "All my life I've been wandering in the dark, but now I have found your hearts and I am satisfied." And what do all the great words come to in the end but that? I love you. I am at rest with you. I have come home. So with that, I'm coming back to the Zoom meeting. And while looking at that picture, I remember that night vividly. That was I believe, the anniversary of UUFT. Is that correct?
Yes.
It was the wedding reception, wasn't it, for Jabel?
Oh, it might have been. I thought the round table didn't seem quite right. Okay, that was a different event. So moving on, I'm going to joys and concerns. So if you have one, please speak up. Unmute first, please.
This is Janine. I have two things I want to mention. Yesterday, I know, was a day of reflection and grief and mourning for most of us, all of us. But it was also my mother's birthday. And so that's where my mind was a lot of the day. But also it was the day that several of my UU friends came over to help me. They had heard about some of the difficulties I was having with my housekeeping help, and they came over. It was Jean Nelson and Vicki George and Jana Cook and Don Chronister, and they came over. I got my lawn mowed, I got some deep cleaning accomplished, and it took a load off my mind and put a load of love on my heart.
Thank you, Janine. I might add to the 9/11 comment. I don't know how many of you might remember, but I was in New York for that, on my way to the World Trade Center when that went down. It was a pretty traumatic week. And yesterday was probably the first time I've really felt the impact for 20 years. So there was a lot of that on the news yesterday, and maybe I shouldn't have subjected myself to it, but I did, and it was somewhat cathartic. Anyone else? Okay. Well, we'll move on then.
Is it still Joys and Concerns?
Yeah, that's what I was,
Sorry.
yeah,
Well, Adelaide turns 2.
yes, Adelaide does turn 2 this week. Happy
Tomorrow.
birthday to her.
The big
Big 2.
TWO.
Okay,
Well, it's, as we're doing birthdays, yes, it's also my birthday and David's birthday this week.
well, happy birthday.
16th
I
and
did
18th.
not compile a list of birthdays. I apologize for
But
that.
that means it is also Kathy Callan's birthday this week because we share a birthday.
All these Virgos.
Y'all are turning 2 as well, right?
Pardon?
Y'all are turning 2 as well.
Yes, right.
Or some multiple thereof.
Yeah.
Any other birthdays, anniversaries, bar mitzvahs, brisses? Well, then we'll move on. Okay. Beth, you're up.
We're going to have a chalice lighting today from Building the Possible by Reverend Scott Taylor, inspired by the words of John Shar. I light this chalice. May this flame cast its light toward the coming days, reminding us that the future is not simply a place we are going, but a place we are creating. The path of new possibilities will not be found, but made. A new world is waiting to be built. May our time together light the way.
Thank you, Beth. And now a musical interlude. Stand by, we're working on it. I don't hear any audio, Kent.
In your Zoom settings,
I told him.
Yeah, go ahead. It worked this morning, so I'm not sure.
Did you
what I'm
click,
doing
did you click that button?
I sure did. I will stop sharing and try again.
If that doesn't work, I can run it from here.
Go ahead and run it from there because it's not wanting to come up properly.
Okay, can you
Here.
stop screen sharing?
Yep. Sorry about that.
Okay.
It worked half hour ago. I don't know what's
course it
the
did.
problem.
And I don't see it on my screen.
All right, I'll try again. It's worth the wait.
Let's see. No, it's not working. Hang on.
Good morning. I'm Bob McDaniel. Today's program is been titled, I guess I titled it, Where Has All the Water Gone? Understanding Kansas Water Resources. I hope by the end of the morning, you'll have a better idea of what the problems are and we can start looking for solutions. When I began preparing for this program, a friend asked me what water shortages had to do with Unitarian Universalism. The answer was simple, I said. Read the seventh principle. Respect for the interdependent web of which we are a part. This program will provide a rationale of why and how water is a key part of this interdependent web. But first, I want to go back in time to 1970. I was a senior at Kansas Wesleyan, a small Methodist college in Salina, and actively involved with a small group of fellow students interested in environmental issues. We were focused on local issues, including the need for sanitary landfills and improvements in public water supply. Our group decided that Kansas Wesleyan would celebrate the first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970. We talked about the precarious state of the environment and the need for immediate action at the local, state, and national levels. Sound familiar? Much of that day is lost in the recesses of my memory, but I remember a collective willingness to blame our parents and their generation for their failure to protect the environment, leaving us, the new generation, to pick up the pieces and take corrective action. Fast forward 50 years. I am now an old man, finally willing to acknowledge that the sins and errors of my parents' generation were fewer than the sins and errors of my own. I live with the knowledge that my children and grandchildren will pay a much higher price for my generation's failings than the price we chose not to pay. Which brings me to today's program. As a Kansan, I want to pretend that our environmental crises are elsewhere. I want to remain comfortably distant from forest fires in the west, hurricanes in the south, and the loss of most of the water in Lake Mead. The disappearance of much of our coastlines in every coastal state has always seemed a distant threat, not worth thinking about. These headlines are an integral part of our everyday lives, but only as headlines. This may be a good example of information overload. This program, however, is not about today's headlines. It is about the environmental crisis we face in Kansas, a crisis 70 years in the making, but a crisis nonetheless. We are losing our most precious resource, water. I want to repeat what I just said. We are losing our most precious resource. Kansas is defined in large part by an agricultural economy and conservative values. As a result, we have rarely been fully aware of how we use our natural resources. In fact, we rarely recognize that much of that use is actually abuse. We have often been reluctant to question the status quo by pretending that our resources are not disappearing. This is intentional ignorance, and I used to share it, but it sets the stage for our current crisis. Kent Forrest and I are environmental advocates. Kent has spent his career in nonprofit, state, and federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Environment and the Environmental Protection Agency. I spent 10 years in state government working as a basin planner with oversight responsibility for 4 Kansas river basins. In our professional lives, Ken and I have both struggled to speak the truth to power. Today, however, we are not constrained by our former employers or the official positions of any state or federal agency. We can speak the truth to you and inform public, hoping that together we can change the future. When I was 23, I thought I had all the time in the world. At 73, it is abundantly clear that I don't. By any measure, the continuation of life as we know it is at risk. Humankind does not have 50 more years to procrastinate and equivocate. Listen carefully as Kent explains what is happening to Kansas water resources. Then start thinking about all the ways we're destroying the only home we have.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate you prompting me to participate with you in this program. 50 years ago this summer, the Forster family first came to Kansas. I immediately fell in love with the prairie and especially its people, and it's been our primary home ever since. UUFT has been the liberal beacon of hope for Beth and I since we first joined in the late 1970s, breaking bread in the old garage. So it's a privilege to be back and to explore with you an issue Bob and I have been talking about since we first met over 40 years ago. This morning, I'm going to give you some basic facts and context about where has all the water gone. Almost want to start singing, where's all the, never mind. From a national and state and Kansas perspective. It is meant to be the beginning of a conversation. Policy, solutions, and discussions on what we can do will come on another day. Today, I just want people to have a common understanding of the basic science, use, and abuse of water in this country and in our state. For anyone who wants more detail or check my sources, I've embedded the links to the information I'm sharing with you in the actual PowerPoint. One final caveat. While I have been in and out of water issues for 50 years, I do not claim to be a water expert. Any mistakes made are my own. So to talk about water, I want to emphasize how precious and limited that it is on planet Earth. We have become so accustomed to use and access to water in this country that we often don't even think much about it. Whether you from the pictured rocks on the Great Lakes, or the reflecting pool of the New York State Capitol in Albany, New York, or whether it's a ford, or whether you ford a small stream like Deep Creek at Pillsbury Crossing near Manhattan, enjoy a glorious red sky and morning on historic Scott Lake in Western Kansas, or just visit Lake Shawnee's Tulip Festival in the spring, or take a gondola ride in Providence, Rhode Island. Water makes all the difference. It's a real struggle to share the dimensions of how precious water is on this planet. So some of my colleagues in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, came up with this poster. While water covers about 71% of the earth, only 3% is fresh water, and only 0.5 or 0.5% is available at any given time as fresh, drinkable, or swimmable water on this planet. The large blue ball on the North American continent covering the Great American Desert, high plains, and Rocky Mountains represents all the water on the earth. That little smaller ball centered over the Ohio River Valley is all the liquid fresh water on the earth. And the small dot over Atlanta, Georgia, thank you, Coca-Cola, is all the water found in all the lakes and rivers on this planet. We do not have a lot of fresh drinkable water, but you wouldn't know it how we use it and abuse it. Now, Kansas is blessed with dozens of rivers in two major river basins, Missouri and Arkansas, and over 25. Can't know what I'm gonna do about it. Thanks. And we have over 25 man-made lakes. When you see the aquifer and surface waters, it is bluer on the map than in reality. Kansas is also unique, and then it covers rainfall from the Ozark Barrow region on the right hand of the screen down in the purple area there, where you have more than 40 inches of rain a year. Looking at the western third, and literally almost half the state, has 24 inches or less. If you notice in the far west, you even have some pink spots that are literally considered arid or desert. Arid or semi-arid territory that should be in prairie grasses or at worst no-till arid cropping and not irrigation. Another piece of the water puzzle that we have to talk about is the Ogallala Aquifer, or now, because everyone can't pronounce that word, they call it the Great Plains Aquifer. It covers 8 states and dates back to 2 to 6 million years in formation. People like me were expressing concern about the use and abuse of this aquifer back in the 70s and 80s. A lot of government, with industry help, has been applied to the issue. So in response to those concerns and the government bureaucratic action, more than 32% of the cumulative depletion of this resource has happened in a period of 2001 to 2008. Let me repeat that. After we identified the issue, after we set up all the bureaucratic notions and industry was there helping us out, 32% of the entire depletion of that aquifer happened in 7 years, while new water plans were being so carefully crafted and implemented throughout the various water basins and authorities across the state. In less than 100 years, it may be mostly consumed, taking an estimated 6,000 years to replenish. The aquifer provides water for several million people, but mostly to industry and irrigation of crops, not meant to be grown in semi-arid Great Plains, formerly called the Great American Desert. Now, so let me continue our story about water basics. Let's discuss how water is used and abused in the United States. Again, these are basic facts that are not readily discussed or understood. The US is a very wasteful and inefficient in most of its resource uses. It is why we are one of the primary climate emitters in the world. Water use in the United States comes from 87% fresh water, and as we run out of water, an ever-growing percentage from saline sources, and the most recent numbers is 13%. When I was in college, that percentage was a lot less. And I tried to find it and I couldn't find it in my college books. The point being, again, 87% fresh water, and we'll let the clock chime away here because it tolls for all of us. So when we talk about water, we end up quickly talking about energy. It is one of the biggest luxuries we have and enjoy. it is one of the largest impacts on climate while consuming most of our resources, including water, is electric power. So in the United States, electric power generation consumes 41% of all our water in the United States. The second largest use of water in the United States is irrigation. So electric power generation and irrigation combined for 78% of all water use in the United States. Public water supply for all our washing, drinking, recreational activities, and flushing our excrement accounts for about 12%. The rest is consumed for aquaculture, mining, people and industries with their own wells and livestock. So that is the national perspective. So how does Kansas compare with this national picture of 78% going to power generation and irrigation? Well, Kansas is really special. We're way up there. We use 87% of those critical luxuries of our society, while less than 9% is used for public supply. Livestock also takes 5 times more than the national average of water consumption. When I first saw these numbers, I couldn't believe it. I mean, Kansas is blessed with one of the last large, huge coal power plants and the last nuclear plant built in the United States. 2 monuments to the dinosaur age of electric utilities of the 20th century. Kansas Power and Light, or KP&L's Jeffrey Energy Center, built down from Manhattan, north of the Kansas River in Bellevue, Kansas. And of course, Wolf Creek by Kansas Gas and Electric, KG&E, being the other. If you add the Sunflower coal-fired plant in southwestern Kansas, you have the trifecta of arrogance, stupidity, and hopefully the last gasp of the carbon-based dinosaur era of electrical generation. So I rechecked the numbers, and indeed, Kansas uses so much for irrigation that it dwarfs electrical power, even when we use our huge infrastructure celebrating coal and nuclear. You can see here that Kansas consumes anywhere from 2 to 5 million gallons per day from groundwater. We are in the top 10 states to consume water. You can see good old California and Texas and Idaho and Nebraska and Arkansas lead the way. Florida, Alabama, and Zero in Kansas fill up the remainder. Kansas is also in the top 10 to consume water for livestock, with between 51 to 100 million gallons of water per day. So what do we do? So what do we get for consuming 67% of our water that is irreplaceable in over 7 generations of children? Well, we grow corn, grain sorghum, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, and then other crops. Over 50% of all the water consumed in Kansas is by irrigation goes to corn, which is in turn sent to livestock feeders, ethanol production, and then some limited exports. Now, corn is a $287 million enterprise in 2020. Now, I thought I'd give you some perspective of the dollars we're talking about here. So I looked up at USDA, and they just look at production and say, this is how much you produced, this is the per bushel price, and this is what the value of the crop is. We're not talking about the industry or the manufacturing or the use of it. This is just the actual cost that most of us have been paying lately through the USDA loan program to keep the farmers afloat. So that 50% corn is $3.2 billion in value in 2020. Grain sorghum was $1.1 billion in value. Soybeans was $2.9 billion. Wheat was 1.2, and alfalfa was 281 million, not million instead of billion. So if you look at this graph here from a historical crop, you can see how it's varied over time. Please note in 2001 on this chart, that is the peak, the second largest peak of water consumption, of crop consumption, of water consumption for crops in Kansas. And that is the beginning of what I talked about earlier of from 2001 to 2007, we consumed over a third of the entire Great Plains aquifer in a period of 7 years, from 2001 to 2007. So the partial economic picture, I didn't want to go too deep in the weeds on the economic part, but just to give you a snapshot, Kansas food manufacturing is $52.2 billion enterprise. It makes about making 21% of the Kansas manufacturer base, creating 103,000 jobs, or approximately 7.4% of the Kansas workforce. An interesting fact I stumbled on that I didn't realize, but should have thought of, is that 61% of all pet food sold in the US comes from Kansas, either directly or indirectly. So guess how water intensive our food production is. So this is a sidebar conversation about our diets and what happens with our food. Our vegetables and fruit average, and this is again, gallons per pound produced, reduced down to the single gallons per pound. So a pound of lettuce consumes 16 gallons of water. And you work your way through the vegetables and the pumpkin and the apples up at 84. Bananas, those high carbs, is 103. Corn doesn't look too innocuous, it's only 108. Chicken, 464, olives, 527, pork, 575, cheese, 599, and beef is what's for dinner, and it's eating us alive at 1,857 gallons per pound of beef. That's how much is consumed. And this gives you this particular chart was very popular with the vegetarians and the vegans. So let me step back now, and the Kansas Geological Survey did a spectacular little slideshow that only takes about 30 seconds. In fact, I'm going to run it for you, and then have some commentary along the way. This is points of diversion. This is, they actually logged every single place where water was diverted in Kansas since 1940 to the present day. Well, since last time they collected data, 2016. So this will give you a sense of place of how well we're doing on reducing our water consumption and how we're tackling the issue. So you notice in the 50s, we're getting some growth there. Okay, I'll stop right here in 1970s. This is right at the time in 1975 when I was at Kansas State University, and I had just written a paper for my biology professor explaining how we shouldn't be building that damn coal plant in Jeffrey Energy Center. And and part of the reason, other than all the environmental issues and all the concerns about coal-fired plants and the climate impacts, was a simple little fact that they didn't have enough water to run the darn plant. And I had run the numbers, and I went to the industry and said, well, they just changed the subject. They didn't have the water to run that plant. You'll notice along the Kansas River, there's a little green spots here. All of a sudden here in the next few years, when the Jeffrey Energy Center goes online, all of a sudden you'll see a sudden explosion of green along the Kansas River. A good part of that, well, as I described earlier, goes to power generation, folks. And a lot of that water was just taken over by KPNL, now Westar, now Evergy, to feed that plant. So here we are in the 80s. We're just going strong here. Here's some new water plans going into effect. Here in the 90s, we're in the 2000s, and we'll stop here again. Please note, 2003, a majority of the Great Plains Aquifer is being consumed now. And now notice how much diversion is going on the east side of the state. Well, all those streams that used to flow across Kansas, that beautiful map I showed you at the beginning where all those blue lines were, most of those blue lines are dirt. And please note how just in the last, from 2003 to 2016, how much diversion we've has been going on to meet the needs of Kansans. There you go. This is present consumption of diversion of water in Kansas. It is a serious situation, folks. There's not too many other places left to divert from, folks. So that's that slide. And then my last slide, I wanted to give you a different perspective looking straight at the aquifer. I told you that a third of all the water consumed from the aquifer happened in 2001 to 2007, give or take. This is the most recent data from 2015 to 2017. And you'll notice over 60% of the aquifer's thickness, that means how much water there is left, in just that 2-year period from 2015 to 2017, the estimated decrease in aquifer thickness. Look at all that dark brown. That's where over 60% of the water's gone in thickness. The brown is 45 to 60% decrease in the thickness in the aquifer. The orange is 30 to 45% decrease in the aquifer's thickness. Now, the good news is there is an increase in thickness. There is a glimmer of hope in all this. Please note in northwest part of Kansas, and of course, the area around Wichita and central Kansas, part of the aquifer, there has been an increase in the last couple of years in aquifer thickness. There has been some, after my bashing water plans, there actually has been some improvements and some change in those areas. So in summary, nearly all our water goes to supporting unsustainable materialistic lifestyle or producing electricity, energy, or food. The electricity produced in the United States is very inefficient, creating major climate change and numerous deleterious environmental impacts, with less than 1 out of 4 BTUs actually going to productive use. The irrigation also used to produce high energy and environmentally damaging monoculture crops used to feed other animals instead of people, and ethanol for your car and truck. The food that people do eventually get, close to 1/4 of all of it is wasted in the United States. Let me repeat that. 25% of all food produced in this country goes into the landfill. The the food that people do eventually get is wasted. As for the Great Plains Aquifer, it took over 2 million years to create and will be used up in less than 100 years due to profiteering, mismanagement, ignorance, and arrogance, while taking thousands of years to replenish. With that, back to you, Bob and Dan.
David will be handling bringing people in who want to make comments. Kent, I want to say that you put together an impressive piece of work. I kept looking for the good news, so I'm glad you found something that wasn't bad news, at least in terms of what's going on in Wichita. A very short explanation of what's going on in Wichita. What Wichita does is they take water from the Little Ark River, they divert it, and then they move that water to ponds where it then drains down into the aquifer. Now, the reason they do that is that more than 30 years ago, they discovered that there was a solid waste disposal plant just outside Wichita. And that plant was essentially losing its material into the aquifer. So in order to keep Wichita water safe, they had to continue pumping more water into the aquifer to balance what they were using. So we try and live with the mistakes we make. So your comments, please.
Thank you, Bob and Kent. Anybody wants to unmute and speak up? Help yourself.
This is Frank Tapp. I had a question about the map showing the marked increase in diversion of water. What do you mean by diversion? Where is it going? What's it being used for? I understood that water basically was returned to the earth regardless of what it was used for. Is that not correct?
The Kansas Geological Survey map from 1940 to 2017 represents the number of places in Kansas people were going and trying to get water that they needed to divert it. We are overusing our limited resources. And yes, you're absolutely right, Frank. As I described in the about the Great Plains Aquifer or Ogallala Aquifer, it took 2 million years for that to 2 to 6 million years to be formed. It'll take at a minimum 600 years to replenish what we've been pumped out in less than the last 70 years.
My
So
next
yeah,
question,
water does return, but it doesn't return where it was pulled from.
my next question is on the increased points of diversion. I mean, eastern Kansas is not increasing in population, or at least not very much. What are these points of diversion? Who's diverting it? What's the diversion?
The lack of water.
No, I mean,
No,
their points of diversion are increasing.
yeah.
What
Go
are
ahead,
these?
Raymond.
What are these points?
I think those are going into agriculture, aren't they, Ken?
Almost
Yeah.
all of it is going to irrigation.
Yeah,
Almost all, and like I described earlier, 87% of all our water goes to either irrigation or electric power generation. So most of it is going right back into the crops, which then they're turned or shipped out for your ethanol or to feed your cattle or your hogs, and very little goes to the people directly.
Raymond, was there anything else you wanted to add?
no, that was it. I just want to clarify that.
Okay.
Thanks.
So
Thanks,
this means that there's been a great deal of increased irrigation of crops. Is that what the diversion points are indicating?
Yes. That and the fact that people are running out of water, so they're looking for ways of getting more water. I mean, Hayes has been buying ranches for the last 30 years, trying to ensure that they have water through the 21st century. I think they have enough, supposedly they've bought enough ranches to keep them clear to 2050 or 2060. That is old, 20-year-old knowledge. I don't know if that's accurate.
Linda?
Bob or Kent, why don't more cities do what Wichita did?
Well, cities aren't the problem, because if I noticed, only 9% of our water is consumed by the cities and people. Only 9% goes to public water supply in Kansas. The rest is all going to industry, whether you call it irrigation for farming or you call it the electric power grid.
Wichita made its choice because it did not have a choice. If they planned to continue as a city, they had to find a way to maintain the aquifer. So essentially they had no choice. And so they made some concessions, and industry made some concessions, agriculture made concessions to essentially addressing how do you maintain an aquifer. Now, there's one more bit of sort of interesting information. Much of the water in eastern Kansas comes via the Missouri River. And the Missouri River actually has as its source the mountains in Yellowstone National Park. And there are a series of dams and reservoirs between that and here. Those reservoirs provide water for lots and lots of uses, including power supply, including agriculture, including public water supply. If you look at the pattern of use over the last several years, almost every year has seen a decline in the amount of water available. The most recent numbers show that in the most recent data available, there was 8% less water coming down the Mississippi, coming down the Missouri than the year before. Now, there are all sorts of patterns out there. All you have to do is look at them. The problem is, once you look at them, what do we do that can take appropriate action to essentially say, hey, wait a second, folks, this is not salvageable. Excuse me, this is not workable, it's not salvageable. We are at a crisis point and we refuse to acknowledge that.
I wanted to ask about the aquifer. How deep beneath the Earth's surface are these aquifers, and does the depth change dramatically across the aquifer? In other words, it's deeper some places and more shallow in others.
Yeah. Yes, Frank, this is Raymond. Yes, they vary in depth significantly, going down hundreds of feet, and it's more shallow in some places. That's why it varies. Some areas are sucked out quickly, others are, it takes quite a long while for them to, but all of them are in decline.
One of the things that I would note is that if you want to look at Garden City out in southwest Kansas, Garden City is a prime example of what's happened to water and with water. And that Garden City used to get most of its water from the Ark River, which flows through or on the edge of Garden City. Now, if you haven't been in Garden City for a while, I would suggest that when you go, that you go to the city park in Garden City. The Ark River flows on the edge of the city park, and the Ark River is one of what's known as navigable rivers. That means that you can gain public access. So first of all, there is no water flow in the Ark River, none whatsoever. Hasn't been for years and years. The second thing about the Ark River is, generally speaking, a river can support lots of growth on the edge of the river. So you see trees, you see vegetation. There is none of that going through the Ark River in Garden City. None of it. What the Ark River is currently used for is recreation by motorcycles and four-wheel vehicles that gain access to the river from public property. Then they go up and down the Ark River in what used to be the bed of the river. And if we think about it, the Ark River in southwest Kansas is a golden example of what we've done that's out there visible for all of us to see.
Anyone
I'd
else?
like to hear a voice of hope.
And the raising of cattle that we eat and also export to other places sounds like a major use for our water also.
Correct.
More than electric generation.
Yeah, that was my biggest surprise because I hadn't looked at these numbers in 20 years. So when I was trying to update everything, that was the biggest surprise, is the dramatic growth in the cattle production, the confined animal feeding, CAFOs. They were just growing when they were just starting 20 some odd years ago, and they've now come full circle and have really taken over.
The aquifers you speak of, are those unique to western Kansas and then those areas? Or are they found in other significant areas in the United States?
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. The biggest one in the world is the Ogallala, now Great Plains Aquifer, which I showed earlier in an early map showing covering 8 states. That's the largest in the freshwater aquifer in the world. And that's covering 8 states, including Kansas. Raymond, you want to share some more?
Oh,
I learned this from you back in the 70s.
Well, like there's an aquifer underneath every stream that flows and off to the side. And there are shallow aquifers, like you say, Ken, everywhere. You're absolutely right. The Ogallala is the singular, huge, deep aquifer with these ancient waters is what they talk about. Yes, there are a lot of aquifers, but there's only one that has this great storage of ancient water, which we're now pumping out. Yeah, I just to confess here a little bit, I worked for energy and natural resources for the legislature back in the 70s and 80s. And as this supply of water to agriculture, as Ken appropriately pointed out, that's the huge use in Kansas. And as that was diminishing, there are all these ideas of how we're going to solve this problem. We're going to divert water from the Missouri River and have a big aqueduct extended all the way to western Kansas. So of course, think of how much evaporation there would be. Then there was the idea, let's run water down along the Rocky Mountains, bring it out of Canada and Alaska, and that will solve the problem of water and these were seriously talked about, at least at some level, back in the 70s and 80s. It's interesting, but you don't hear much of it anymore.
This is Bob. One of the points that I tried to make is that in 50 years, virtually every part of our use of water has gotten worse. In almost all cases, terribly worse. And the time to have done something about this was when we first started talking about it. And the example I gave was celebrating Earth Day in 1970. We are not going back. Ken has explained how long it would take to refill the Ogallala Aquifer. Not going to happen. The question becomes, what will continue to exist in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and how do we prepare for that to happen? The one guarantee that I will make is that 30 years from now, there will not be feedlots in western Kansas feeding a huge packing industry, all supported by water from the Ogallala. That time is coming to an end. The question is, how do we prepare for it? If you look at eastern Kansas, it may be a little better, but much of that depends on continuing snowmelt going into the Missouri River, and a large part of urban Kansas gets its water from that snowmelt.
Which is declining.
Yeah, and you can quibble with some of the numbers, you can quibble with some of the dates. What you can't quibble with is all of the water on which we depend is, first of all, getting less and less, and secondly, particularly in terms of surface water, becoming more and more polluted.
Anyone else?
Bob, do you think, or Raymond, or Kent, any of you, do you think the feedlots are simply going to migrate to the east? I've noticed an increased number of confined animal facilities in east of Highway 81, if you will, in recent years. Won't the migration just go away from the played out water mining areas?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it will just gradually move both east and north. And I suspect you'll see more up, a return of feeding cattle up in Iowa, which kind of disappeared. And that'll all come back, but as huge feeding operations.
That's my biggest fear, is that they will just incrementally just move away, just follow the water and follow the resource, whatever it may be, without any plan or sense of place, and just pollute the rest of the state with those darn things. And confined animal feeding planks are a huge environmental impact. And the methane that they produce is 5 times worse than the normal climate emitters that we talk about. I know Senator Pat Roberts was making fun of us when EPA came out showing about those cattle farts. You know, he's trying to denigrate the report. But the point of the matter is, it is 5 times more dangerous than the regular climate change. And so you increase confined animal feeding, you're increasing the climate change. So you're creating more problems, not less. We should have less confined animal feeding. And as I showed you with the food chart, 1,894 gallons per pound of water is needed. And that includes all that corn that they're feeding them, which cattle are not used to and shouldn't have, which is one of the reasons why they fart so much, because their bodies are not built to eat corn. So the whole system is industrialized to the point, and it's a vicious cycle that doesn't work, and it makes things worse. And we have to rethink the whole thing. We should be having a buffalo commons where we eat the buffalo that don't create all that problems. And we start having smaller processing plants that just take the buffalo rather than the cattle that don't belong there in the first place. But that's for another day, another time. We'll talk about that some other day.
Kent, can you talk a little bit about what people can do to get more information? Perhaps you had some information sent about the Sierra Club and their meetings and issues they're looking at, because if people are interested, there is good information out there and available. There are organizations that are working diligently to try and make things better.
In Kansas, we are blessed with the Kansas Audubon Council, or Audubon, and you also have the Kansas Sierra Club with chapters in Topeka and Lawrence and elsewhere. So yes, there are groups getting engaged. As a part of promotion for this program, we sent out a link with this Kansas Sierra Club that had their take on the brand new water plan that was delayed due to COVID. Allegedly, I think they're still recovering from the Brownback years.
They all are.
They all are, yes. But anyway, the delayed water plan and their sense of place on that. So yes, there are groups, and there need to be more of them actually activated.
Anyone else? Lou, I see that you unmuted. Did you have a comment to make? I guess
Heavy
not.
stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, Linda.
This is Don Cronister. And I would just like to, it's been a very informative morning, and a lot of things that I've known for a long time, but you guys put together one hell of a program. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Linda.
Linda.
Okay, I just want the knowledge that Kent and Bob and Raymond have is just incredible, and those graphs and those slides you had, Kent. Obviously, I'm sitting here extremely depressed, but your knowledge is just phenomenal, and you've taught us an awful lot this morning.
This is Vicki George speaking. Kent, what about, you didn't mention fracking. I'm assuming that was included in the loss of water to energy uses.
My screen's frozen. I can't hear or see or do anything.
Well, mine said it was over with
Now,
a long time ago.
yes, fracking is part of
It
the
wasn't?
electric power. It's broadly, for
I guess I'll go
USGS,
to,
the USGS lumps fracking is part of electrical power generation, which is not accurate, but that is correct. The fracking, but they use more chemicals than water. And that's another horror story that we've only begin to hear about. At EPA, we weren't allowed, if you wanted to talk about the chemicals being used in fracking, you had to sign an NDA and take a secret, like the CIA, you had to sign paperwork that says you'll never divulge to your 7 generations future about what's really going on there. I fortunately didn't have to go into that operation, but that's another horror story that we'll find out. Just like we heard about MTB and the gasoline that caused all these horrible problems across the United States. You're going to see that same thing happen with fracking. Well, I guarantee you, before I die, there'll be some huge story about how all that crap that they're fracking is causing all horrible problems. It's just a matter of time of when that breaks out. Another horror story.
Progress.
Yeah, and that progress is one of the fundamental issues in the environmental field. I'm reading a book right now describing the history of environmentalism from the 70s to now, and the radical part of it. And the whole point about what is progress and what is material goods and what is our real purpose in life. And that's something that we're going to have to tackle directly. Bob's snail darter thing touched on it very well way back when. But we have a reckoning coming, and we have to start deciding what's important in life. And we're not there yet.
Anyone else have a comment or question?
Yeah, so Bob and Kent and Raymond, for that matter, you guys eat beef?
Yes, although less and less of it and more of it locally sourced.
Yeah.
All of it locally sourced.
I do, but shouldn't.
I believe that there's a Sierra Club discussion of water coming up. Can someone inform our listeners about how they could access that?
It's been done. Lou did it, gave out notice of it. You got an email on it.
What? Say that for those who didn't get the email.
Anyone from UUFT got the email, but just I'm happy to happy to send it to anyone, the link.
Yeah, send it out.
Will do.
Send it out mass to everybody. Yeah.
We'll send it out again. Sure.
I have a question, Kent. You talked about how it would be better if we let the buffalo graze and switch from beef to buffalo. Has there been any exploration into, can you mute Mike? I'm hearing an echo in my ears. Has there been any exploration into increasing the use of buffalo and trying to get people to eat more buffalo? Kind of like less of like trying to shut down beef, but make buffalo more prevalent to kind of sway that industry.
A guy by the name of that owns CNN, Ted Turner, is the leading champion of that and has been doing that for more than 20 years now. And he's one of the largest landowners in the United States. He has bought more land to keep in grass and to put bison on than anyone else on the planet. And so, yes, there is a lot of big push for it. And so you always, whenever you travel, you want to go to his restaurant that supports all that. His ranches support his restaurants. And he's created a closed loop system as much as he can. And that's one. The second thing is the Buffalo, there's people back when Raymond and I were in the legislature, there was a person, there was a couple that came out with the whole concept of the Buffalo Commons. It was all poo-pooed and they pushed them off as just stupid liberals. Mike Hayden, about 18 years ago, when last time I talked to him, when I came back for a meeting, Mike Hayden was one of the ones saying, that might not have been a bad idea after all. Having growing up there, I get it now. And so, which surprised the heck out of me that Mike Hayden would say that. Yes, there is the concept out there. There's a bunch of radical environmental groups that have been trying to recreate the chain of wildlands from Alaska all the way down through Texas, including Kansas, of trying to create this belt of rediscovered prairies that would, recreate the great Wild West and grasses. But that's a 100-year project that we need to start now. Should have started in the 70s, but they got poo-pooed.
This is Vicky again. What about growing hemp? How does it compare?
I don't know.
Now, I know that there are some local bison farms here to Topeka. I know there's a bison farm in Auburn. Does anybody know of any local places to buy bison meat as a substitute for any beef that a family might consume?
Yes, you can, depending on the day, you can actually buy it at Dillon's and Hy-Vee and Sprouts and your local co-op here in Lawrence. It's always, it's a growing effort. I usually buy them out when I go because I practice what I preach, at least try to some of the time. And so, yes, it is available almost everywhere at limited times because people like me keep buying them out. So we're trying to increase the market. It is growing exponentially.
That's great.
Buffalo don't cause the same problems that cattle do?
No, because they eat the grass. They don't have to eat corn. You don't pump water out from the aquifer to make corn to feed into a cattle that shouldn't eat corn in the first place to produce all that weight. So by definition, they're already much better than any beef cattle, except for now that's not totally fair because we have a lot of cattle that comes up from Texas and come to the Flint Hills and they intensively graze in the spring or in the fall. And those are all grass fed and they're fattened up thing. But generally speaking, the science says 1,872 pounds of water per pound is abused to create beef cattle.
Yeah, and a bison is its natural environment where cattle was brought into the North America.
But if you notice on that food, this PowerPoint's available to anybody who wants to just let me know. But that food graph of pounds per pound, of gallons per pound, really does encourage you people to go up the food chain or down the food chain, depending on how you describe it, to eat more vegetables and grains rather than pork and beef and chicken and the rest.
Hey, Kent, do you know the numbers behind those numbers? Does that include the water used in processing or just the water used in initial production?
You asked the right question, and I've asked it for the people at K-State where I got these numbers. I haven't gotten an answer, so I don't know for sure. I believe so, but I'm not sure.
I want to take just a minute. This is Bob again. Richie noted that coming up on September 18th is the Kansas Book Festival with lots and lots of great speakers at Washburn University. One of those speakers is Wes Jackson, who is actually one of the Kansas heroes in terms of sort of laying the way for what needs to happen. And Wes is going to do a program on a Kansas farm boy's take on sustainable society. Jackson created the Land Institute just outside Salina, has done wonderful, wonderful work on how can we look at sustainable agriculture. So for those of you interested in the issue, the thing is coming up on the 18th. It's all free. It's all at Washburn. And I think we're probably right at time. Are we, David?
Yeah, I was just about to mention, Bob, that it's 11:45, which you suggested be our end time. Anyone need a last say?
Just what a wonderful
Beth
conversation.
does.
Thank you.
Okay, Beth.
Thanks, everyone, for your patience and your persistence.
I would like to extinguish the chalice. And in extinguishing the chalice, we have a saying by Thich Nhat Hanh: water flows from high in the mountains. Water runs deep in the earth. Miraculously, water comes to us and sustains us all. Water flows over these hands. May I use them skillfully to preserve our precious planet.
Thank you all. Same time, same place, same bat channel next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Adios.
Have a wonderful week.